I'm Denny Moen. I'm the local AFCEA rep. I guess I kind of perform as the sheriff for these classes. Just a reminder, those of you that are looking for credit, on the way out at the end of the presentation, to stop by. You've probably already figured out how to do that somewhere else. The other thing to remind you that the session is recorded. And so we get the question, answer. It's really important to capture the question. I have the tool. So very important, and that's for future use by others that might not be in the session. So I'm not going to try to introduce the speaker. I'll let them do that itself. Everybody understand what we got to do? Right? Where'd he go?
Good morning, everybody. The problem with being tall is not every microphone works for you. How's everybody doing today? I notice most of you are sitting all the way in the back. It's always fun, right? All right. My name is Clint Walker. I am with the Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. So how many of you have heard of CISA before? Yeah. First time I ever asked that question 5 years ago, nobody ever heard of us. So we're trying to make a name for ourselves. How many of you know what we do? That's a better question. That's what we're going to kind of talk about today, is what really does Homeland Security look like? So this is me. So I recently graduated, or actually my thesis is still waiting review, but I am graduating from the Naval Postgraduate School Center for Homeland Security and Defense with a master's in Homeland Security. So during our artificial intelligence course that we were taking, one of the tests that we had is we had to have, each of us got a partner, and you had to describe using words only exactly what your partner looked like and have AI create an image of that. This is the image that was created based on what my partner put in there. I think it's pretty darn close. So I really love this image. And it's some of the fun things that you can do with artificial intelligence these days. So it's a fun thing that you can do around the house too. Just figure out what the limitations of artificial intelligence is. How does it see the world versus how you see the world? Could you really describe something in detail? Because when you look at, when you're talking to another person, you have some assumptions that they understand when you say what a banana is, but how do you describe to a computer what a banana is? So it's a really fun test on exactly how we communicate with the machines that we actually use. So besides that, I am the current acting chief for the cyber program here in Region 4. So I cover North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky, and Tennessee. I started this program 9 years ago with the Department of Homeland Security. It was just me running all those 8 states by myself. I now have a team of 22 people that report to me, and that's how much our program has grown. And what we are is we are cybersecurity advisors. Our job is exactly as the title states. We are a no-cost resource for federal government, Department of Defense, state and local government, private industry, average citizen to call me up and say, hey, Clint, I want to know more about cybersecurity. I'm having problems with X. We do everything from incident response, incident coordination, penetration testing, assessments, all at no cost to you, and we'll talk about that later on. That's the boring stuff. So besides that, my background also includes that I used to be the Chief Information Security Officer for the National Air and Space Intelligence Center up at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I was also one of the security managers for the Department of Homeland Security, or Department of Health and Human Services. I stood up their Computer Security Incident Response Center in Atlanta, Georgia. That's why I'm down here now. And then past that, I've also worked in the banking industry. I was one of those people that was hired to break into places. So, they said, is this bank really secure? So if you've ever seen the movie Sneakers, I didn't do a lot of the physical side of the house, but I did it from a cyber side, is could we actually get in, get the money out? And I have lots of fun stories around my time doing that. And I did that for the Department of Defense too. Could you get onto this military base? Could you get in this secure facility? And the answer is always, yes, I can. So, and if I can do it, I'm pretty sure the bad guys can do it too. So speaking of the movie Sneakers, so I will just preface all of this by saying that I had all these really cool, fun quotes on a lot of things in a lot of my slides. And we have a new policy now where everything has to go through external affairs. So all the fun stuff has been removed from my slide deck. But this one I got to keep in there, and I love this quote. For those of you who've never seen the movie Sneakers, I do highly recommend it. And he said, there's a war out there, old friend, a world war. And it's not about who's got the most bullets, it's about who controls the information. What we see and hear, how we work, what we think, it's all about the information. That was in 1992. I can say that they hit the nail on the head with that one, wouldn't you? Because that's really what we're looking at. For those of you who've seen me talk before, you've seen this. All of my talks start off with my homage to my father. My father is my personal hero. My father's fought in several wars. He did work for he retired from the Air Force. He helped build some of the first supercomputers for the Air Force. And my dad always taught me that life is about the little things. And so my dad, like every other father out there, and me being a father myself, I attribute to this too. My dad lived to embarrass his kids. The more embarrassing he could make the situation, the better he thought life was. And one of the things that my dad did that embarrassed me was that he used to stop and pick up pennies anywhere that he found them. He would stop traffic at a busy intersection if he saw a penny out in the middle of the road. And I kid you not on that one. I've seen him almost dismantle a Burger King, cashier's stand because he saw a penny that was wedged underneath there probably when the place was built. And I'd always get embarrassed and be like, Dad, why are you stopping to pick up the penny? We don't need the penny. And he'd always shake his head and look at me and said, he goes, it saddens me that all you see is a penny. He goes, because what I see is an opportunity. He's like, an opportunity to be 1 cent richer than I was before I stopped and took care of that opportunity. He's like, I'm letting life know that even though it's the smallest of opportunities, I'm willing to take time to take care of it. That way I can see the big opportunities when they come to me as well. Because if you're not willing to take care of the small opportunities, you're going to miss the big opportunities. So he used to always tell me this story, and I'm sure that most of you have seen this, for want of a nail. It's been attributed to many great leaders throughout history, for want of a nail. So without a horseshoe nail, you couldn't put the horseshoe on the horse. Without the horse, you couldn't have a rider. Without the rider, you couldn't deliver a message. And without the message, the battle was lost, and then the kingdom was lost, all because of a horseshoe nail. I've updated this for today's world because it's all about the data. As we said, it's a world of information. And a data lives in an asset. And without that asset, you can't have a process. Without a process, you can't have a system. Without the system, you can't have an operation. Without an operation, you don't have a service to deliver. And if you can't deliver a service, you have no mission. All because of the data. And data, if you look at the evolution of things, is, data comes in many different facets. I'm not just talking about data that's in a computer. I'm talking about data that might be on a piece of paper or data that's in somebody's head. How many of you have ever had somebody retire after 20 years of service or more, and all that information walks out the door the day that they do? How many of you'd like to have that person back, right? Yeah. As part of being in cybersecurity, we're actually expected, because succession planning and keeping business operations going, that's what cybersecurity is about. And sometimes it's about looking at who's retiring or who's leaving the organization and what data leaves with them. And how do you protect that data? How do you protect your operations without that data? Because this is what you're looking at. You have a mission that you're delivering. And the cyber threat actors, or the just threat actors, are looking at how can they take that mission away from you? How can they make your life miserable? It depends, and we're going to talk about lots of different threat actors here in just a moment. When I taught a class, I used to say, and I apologize to the NFL for using them as an example, but we used to say, how would you stop the Super Bowl without attacking the Super Bowl directly? Think about that. This is what your adversaries, for those of you who work on military bases, how would you stop a military base without attacking the military base directly? Is there something that you could do? Back when I started in this industry, I think military bases were pretty much self-sufficient. We had our own power, we had our own water, we had a lot of that, but now we rely on the local communities for a lot of that stuff. So how could you stop an organization without attacking the organization directly? Keep that in mind, because that's what you're looking at, is taking away one thing, one small thing, and the cascading effect that has until you've destroyed the entire mission. What is the smallest widget that a threat actor could go after and have a cascading effect? I once got tasked with how would I shut down a bank without attacking the bank's computer systems directly. So I couldn't tackle their IT systems at all. So I went in through their OT systems. I got into their heating and air conditioning systems for their command center or for their data center, and I just turned off all their alarms, all their alerts, set everything to make it look like every readout would be normal, and then I shut everything off. So the temperature slowly rose until all the systems shut down on their own from overheating. Never attacked their systems directly, but I took their mission out. That's what the threat actors are looking at. They're looking at every different angle they can come after you and still impact your mission. When people ask me what Homeland Security is, and this is where I wish I could walk around, hate being behind a podium. So the first day that I showed up at the Center for Homeland Security and Defense, the first class that we had, we're sitting there. Oh, yeah. We'll figure it out here. So the first class that we had, there are 32 of us that were accepted into the program. And the first day, the instructor walks in, and the instructor said, I bet you all think that we're going to spend the first couple hours of the class where you're going to stand up, say who you are, where you're from. And he's like, I'm going to tell you right now, he's like, I don't give a shit. Excuse my French. He's like, what you're going to do is you're going to stand up and you're going to say what your definition of Homeland Security is. And if everybody in this room agrees on what your definition of Homeland Security is, then we're going to go on with class. We're just going to get right underway. But if even one person disagrees with what you say, then you're out. So you stood up, you said what your definition of Homeland Security was, and I'd say that when I got to my turn, I stood up, said it. I only had 6 other people in the room agree with me. A lot of other heads were shaking. Nope, that's not what I think Homeland Security was. And I thought I was pretty good because I'd been doing this for most of my career. Not one person in that room got everybody to agree on what their definition of Homeland Security is. 18 months later, when we were graduating, when we were turning in our master's thesis, we realized we still did not have a working definition of what Homeland Security is. So when your job, when you're tasked with defending the homeland, and nobody has a definition on what that is, how do you do that? That's a question to the audience. This is the class participation part, right? Does anybody have an answer? Yeah, because I learned so much in 18 months. It was a fire hose of just information coming at me. I learned, because I'd always looked at Homeland Security from the national perspective, defending things at the national point. But I found out that there's state Homeland Security. I found out that there's city Homeland Security, that Homeland Security starts at the smallest little piece and so impacting a small community can impact the entire nation. How do you defend something when the smallest little thing can cause the biggest spark to ignite throughout a country? But people always ask, well, let's turn it around. Let's look at what we're defending against. This is the risk landscape. This chart is a lot bigger than it used to be when I first started in this industry almost 30 years ago now. Insider threat is still king. Most cyber threats happen because of insiders, because now we define insider differently. And that's the fun thing about Homeland Security is definitions can change too, which changes your job completely. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more here in just a moment. But insider threat, we used to just worry about the advertent insider, right? The person who wanted to do harm to you because they were disgruntled or because they were being paid to do something or they espionage or whatever you wanted. But now we have this other thing because technology moves to the edge, right? So now we have the inadvertent insider. We have the person who's just clicking on links, opening attachment, that's trying to find a way to do their job better. My first mentor told me that salespeople got to sell. He looked at me and said, a salesperson will get fired if they don't meet their sales goals, but they won't get fired for having a security incident. They'll get a slap on the wrist maybe, so they're willing to bypass any security policy you put into place in order to make a sale. Because one's going to lose them their job, the other's just going to get them a slap on the wrist. And if you equate that to every single job out there, managers got to manage, accountants got to account. Everybody's willing to bypass cybersecurity to keep their job. So that's what you're fighting against is people who are looking to keep their job and bypass your security controls so that they can look better or they can do more with what they're trying to do. And then we have acts of terrorism. This one didn't used to be, we always used to think about terrorism as being something that happened in other countries, right? It might happen to US citizens, but it happened in other countries. And 9/11 really changed that for us. Not that we didn't have terrorist activities before that, but that was the big one. That was the one that really put us on the map. But now, the thought of terrorism has expanded in the United States. What do we have now? Domestic terrorism, right? We can't really call it terrorism here in the United States because of the way that we define that term. So we have domestic extremism. But think about domestic extremism and terrorism combined. So now we've just expanded that threat. We're not just worried about foreign actors trying to do something on our soil. We're worried about US actors doing something on our soil. I asked this to a lot of CIOs, CEOs of their organization. How many of them would bet their job that everybody that works for them, that their job is the most important thing in their life? More important than their religion, more important than their race, more important than any other ideology that they have, any other group that they're a part of? How many of them would utilize their employment with you as an advantage to do something based on one of their other beliefs? And all of them looked around and said, wow, that's a huge threat avenue. I was like, when you combine domestic extremism with insider, you start to open up a whole new threat vector. You know, because it's not always in their mind malicious. It might just be somebody in their group asking them, hey, do you think you could get us, you know, this information out of your organization? You have access to it. Could you get this for us? And they think, well, there's no harm in this. I don't think that this is company confidential. So they start supplying that information. But you get enough little widgets giving them that information, suddenly they put a whole profile together. Then we have extreme weather. Extreme weather has always been an issue. And extreme weather is getting worse. We have, you know, hurricanes, we've got floods, we've got wildfires. But it's now having, because of the interconnected society we have, it's now having a national, if not global, impact because of the way that things are happening. How many of you were prepared for COVID before COVID hit? Yeah? Hopefully everybody in the DoD raised your hand. Don't you have? We always had to have pandemic action plans when I was at the DoD. You know, but it really changed the world. COVID changed the way the world did IT. An impact like that, an organization, so a disease or a virus caused us to change the way that we fundamentally did cybersecurity, the way that we did networking, the way that we did, you know, work. And then, of course, accidents and technical failures. Somebody's always cutting a cable somewhere. Somebody's always driving into a transformer. I've heard that in some states it's a rite of passage. When you hit 18, you're supposed to go out and shoot substations with a gun to make it seem like you're a real man. So, you know, all these fun things happen. So this is the risk landscape, and this doesn't even really touch on everything. You notice I skipped over cyber attacks because that's the real big one there, isn't it? But it's not just the script kiddies we're up against anymore. You know, we still have cyber criminals. We have people who are doing this, financially motivated cyber actors. They're still out there. But now we have the hacktivists. We have people that are looking to use their cyber as a way to further their cause. How many of you would pay a ransom? Anybody? For if you get hit with ransomware, how many of you would pay that? Hopefully nobody. How many of you would pay the ransom if it was the life support system at the local hospital that they hit and they were threatening to shut everybody's life support system down unless you paid the ransom? Is that a little different? Now, what if the ransom wasn't money? What if the ransom was they wanted you to get up in front of the public and say that your company has done something really bad in another company, or your company supports this other thing that's going on, or that your company, one of the ones that I've seen, that this company got hit with ransomware, and the ransom demand was they had to get up and say publicly that their CEO of the company was a pedophile and that they were going to look to have him removed from position. Now, this person, to my knowledge, was not a pedophile. There's no evidence against it, but that's what these people wanted. That's what's going on out there, is sometimes it's a cause that they're pushing for, and it's not actual money. How do you defend against a cause? And then we look at advanced persistent threat and nation-state actors. And every nation-state out there is a little different. These are some of the top 4 that we're looking at right now. But the People's Republic of China, so we got so used to fighting Russia, because Russia, I like to say Russia is like a bull in a china shop. You know, Russia was the smash and grab. They just want to steal information, or they want to cause disruption. They want to do things. But China's not like that. China is about the long game. China's willing to live in a system for 10 years before they do anything with it. Matter of fact, we find it funny that we've actually seen evidence that China gets into systems and they actually clean up the systems that they're in to make them operate better so nobody notices they're in there. They try and keep them stable so that the system is still around when they need it. They'll actually patch systems. They'll find other threat actors in your system and kick them out because they want to be the only ones in there. How do you defend against something like that? Somebody who can live off the land, that can stay in a system for a very long period of time. And then, of course, you have Iran and you have, North Korea And then you start to have all four of these starting to work together in little bits and pieces. That should scare everybody. What is their motivation? What are they looking to do? What if, let's say that a nation invaded Taiwan, and they came to the United States and they said, look, we're going to invade Taiwan and you're going to stay out of this, because if you don't stay out of this, we're in every single one of your power plants and every single one of your water plants, and we're going to start shutting things off. Do you think the American people will support you if we start making their life at home miserable? Just stay out of Taiwan. Let us do what we're going to do in Taiwan. So cyber is now a political weapon, posturing, and they occasionally will execute something in order to say, see, we told you we had the capabilities, we've shown it, now back off on what we're going to do politically throughout the rest of the world. It's becoming a real weapon for people to use cyber to get what they want from a nation-state perspective, something we'd never seen before. So when we look at Homeland Security, a lot of people say that Homeland Security is securing the 16 sectors of critical infrastructure. I think it goes even beyond that, but let's start at the 16 sectors of critical infrastructure. For those of you who've never seen it, this is what they look like. When I go in and talk to organizations, one of the big things I talk to them about is, where do you fit on this list? I love that there are 16 sectors, but some of these sectors, you might not understand where you fit or how you fit into it. If I was to ask any of you, where does FedEx fit on this list? Some of you might be like, well, FedEx is a delivery company, aren't they? Well, yeah, but let's look a little farther at them. They actually own one of the largest air fleets in the world. So doesn't that put them in the transportation category? But they're also delivering critical medical supplies. Matter of fact, they do heart or the transplant systems in order to get transplant things where they need to go. A lot of that goes through FedEx, through their health system and stuff like that. So doesn't that put them in the healthcare or emergency response sector? FedEx also is its own bank for its employees. So doesn't that put them in the financial services sector? They're also a commercial entity. They have all those FedEx stores and stuff like that. So FedEx is actually in, I think when we did the calculation, 10 of the 16 sectors. And the other 6 sectors still rely on FedEx in order to get their stuff done. And what I found from most organizations, they usually know one of the sectors that they're in, but they don't know all the sectors that actually depend on them in order. So it's not just what happens if I hit you, because like I said, when I used to do this, I never attacked a company I was going after directly. I was going to find their smallest widget supplier, somebody who didn't put a lot of money into cybersecurity. I was going after them. I was going to get into their systems and then use their systems to attack the next target, what I used to call the Kevin Bacon attack, because I'd look 7 degrees to the left and that's where I was going. Now they call it island hopping. I can jump into one company and use that company's system to attack another company, and use that system to attack another company, and so on and so forth. And I've got some graphics on that. But before we get into that, I want to take just a moment for a history lesson. How many of you know why we use the term cybersecurity now? Anybody? Somebody who's heard one of my talks before probably knows. So when I got into this, we were called computer security specialists. Tom, you remember those days? We were securing a computer. Back when we only used to have a mainframe, you used to have to schedule time on a mainframe, and that's what you got. And then we became network computer specialists, or network security specialists, because then we started saying, let's network some computers together. So we started defending that network. Then we became information security, because they said, now you're defending all the information regardless of where it's flowing to or where it's flowing from. Then for a while we were information assurance, right? Some of you DoD guys remember information assurance days, right? Hopefully you get a couple nods. And then we became cybersecurity. Cyber is not a buzzword. Cyber actually has meaning. There's a reason why the federal government, because we don't like to move terms unless we absolutely have to. There's actually a definition behind it. And the reason that we moved to the term cyber is because it's not about information technology anymore. I like to laugh and joke that the day that they moved me from being an information system or an information assurance or information security person to cybersecurity, my job tripled, but I got the same pay. So good for me. Because you're no longer just looking at information technology. You're looking at operational technology, so IT and OT, and then the Internet of Things, so IoT. So all of these new things that you have out there, so building automation, elevators, escalators, badge access systems, camera systems, HVAC systems, environmental control systems, all of that is now in the cyber realm. Transportation. You can't just take a wrench and a screwdriver and go work on a car anymore. It almost takes a computer degree to work on cars. They're mostly computerized now. Transportation systems, we have self-driving cars. Cars have more computers in them than some of the original space shuttle programs that we had. Productivity, robots, artificial intelligence, healthcare. I remember back when I was young, we used to have to get an x-ray, on an arm or something like that. Somebody had to take the x-ray, that you had to run it down to imaging. Imaging would make a picture. Somebody had to run that picture back up the film and put it on a board for the doctor to look at. Now it's all done automatically, through a series of network systems. And you've added all this convenience comes at the cost of security. We've built a world of convenience without the thought behind how we're going to secure this. What was the security behind operational technology? The fact that it wasn't connected to anything else. It was a standalone, self-secured system that you had to physically be in front of. That was the whole purpose of operational technology. So in our infinite wisdom to build a nice, convenient society, what do? We said, let's hook that up to the internet. So now we have all this operational technology that's now hooked to the internet so that we have more functionality, more convenience with it, but we have just taken the one security that it had and we threw it right out the window. And that's what the threat actors are going after. We see a large number of threat actors are shifting their focus from information technology systems to operational technology systems. Imagine somebody that could poison a water system or cause some sort of attack, a kinetic effect from a cyber attack, whether it be taking out a power grid or something along those lines. Because this is what you're looking at for response. You're looking at the ability to respond to the incident. You're looking at how you're going to recover if it becomes a disaster. And then you're looking at, most importantly, how do you continue your mission despite everything else that's going on? For a lot of organizations, this is all one group trying to do all three of these things. And in my experiences, you need three separate groups, each one focused on their very specific task in order to make all of this happen. But let's talk about the attack vectors real fast. So let's talk about, all of us, how many of you are aware of the triad, right? Confidentiality, availability, and integrity, right? We all preach the CIA. We're all there. But have you ever looked at it from an attacker's perspective? What does the CIA, so we all look at, so every day the news is reporting on an availability attack, right? That's ransomware. We're taking something and making it unavailable to you. That gets a lot of press. Confidentiality attacks, espionage, they're taking something secret and they're stealing it or they're making it public, extortionware kind of thing. Nobody ever talks about the integrity attack. When I was with the DoD, the integrity attack is the one that scared us the most. And it's the one that nobody talks about. An integrity attack is where I get into a system and I manipulate it. I change the ones to zeros. What if I could feed false intelligence into your intelligence system by just adding my own data into there? That's an integrity attack. I'm not taking anything out. I'm not stealing anything. I'm not making it unavailable. I'm changing the data. I'm changing who those fingerprints belong to. Imagine if I could get into a system and I could change the amount of chlorine that's being put into a water supply, or I could change the chemicals in order to poison it, or I could degrade how durable or flexible steel is as it's being manufactured. I'm a walker by name, but a talker by trade, so I like to walk and talk at the same time. All right, this is better. So that's what integrity attacks look like, but nobody talks about them is because those aren't the flashy things. But that's actually what a lot of the nation-state threat actors would rather do. They'd want to get into a system and they want to manipulate the data. I actually saw a ransomware attack where the ransomware was the smokescreen. Threat actors got into a bank. They knew that the bank validated all new accounts at midnight every night. That's when they did that sort of thing. So these threat actors got in and they created new accounts. And then they had their ransomware go off at 11:59 because they knew that the bank backed up data every half hour. So what happens is they got hit with ransomware. They didn't care whether the bank paid the ransomware or not because they created accounts. Each of these accounts had approximately $600,000 or $700,000 in them. So what the bank did was they restored from backup, right? That's what we would all do. We restore from backup. Guess what they just restored? All the accounts that were fictionally created. All this money was already in these accounts. They restored it, and the bank just said, hey, we restored from backup. We trust everything that came in from our backups, so it all must be right. They validated everything and moved on with business. The threat actors still got what they wanted because they did an integrity attack. They created something new. They created data where data didn't exist. They still got money. Now, they were still caught. They actually did it very poorly. But that's the thing, is that we're looking at these integrity attacks. What could somebody do? How could data manipulation cause an impact to your organization? How would you notice that something had been done? Because believe it or not, you are a target. This is the part that I like to talk about, and Kurt, I think I saw you in the audience there. You know, Kurt goes back with me to my NASIC days, but my first day at the National Air and Space Intelligence Center, the installation commander came up to me, he shook my hand, and he said, "Welcome to the Chinese watch list." He said, "From this day forward, the Chinese now know that you work for us. They're now aware that you hold a position with an intelligence community, and the Chinese are very interested in you as a person. They're gonna buy your mortgage. They're gonna send you credit card offers. They want you to be financially indebted to them. They want to see what you spend your money on. They want to know what you kind of things that you buy. They want to know everything they can about you to see if there's some way that they can manipulate you to get you to work for them, whether advertently or inadvertently work for them." That was 30 years ago. Now, in the world of big data, I like to joke around that Amazon knows more about my wife than I do. This is happening every day to every supplier, every way that we do. Your search engines are collecting data on you. And all these large nation state actors have access to a lot of this data, whether they're buying it or whether they're getting it through some other activity. They can target individuals. And the shift from people working at home, the threat actors have shifted their focus from targeting businesses directly to targeting the individual employees in their homes, getting into that Nest thermostat or that Xbox or whatever, and they're using the home networks then to jump and piggyback to find that work PC, and then when they connect through VPN, to use the VPN tunnel to get into the network that they were looking to get in the first place. How are you protecting your employees while they're at their home still using your equipment? That's what we're looking at with a lot of these things, is the threat actors are shifting their focus to how we actually operate. How many of you would say that your social media for your organization is very well controlled? Because we're seeing, this is the other thing, is a lot of organizations, a lot of threat actors are going after the social media accounts that you own, because guess what? You set your own password policy for your internal IT, but who's setting the password policy for your social media accounts? How are you setting up your social media accounts? How would you get your social media, how would you prove to LinkedIn or to Facebook that you are who you say you are as a company when somebody else is claiming the exact same thing because they've taken over? They have all the contact information now. They've changed everything to be their information. How would you prove that you are who you say you are, or that you could get it back? How long would that take you? What damage could be done if they were using this to post things about you? We saw one instance where a city actually had a threat actor take over their social media account, and they told all the employees through the social media saying, "Hey, we have the budget issues going on. Everybody just take the day off tomorrow. You'll still get paid for it. Just don't bother showing up to work. They take this as a day holiday. Unless you're an essential employee, please stay home." That came through their official social media, so people stayed home. City was in chaos as they tried to figure it out. That's all the things. I mean, we could go into I could spend hours on this chart here. How am I doing? All right. But let's talk about the digital ecosystem. This is what we're really here to talk about. It just takes me a long time to get to it. How many of you know what your digital ecosystem looks like? If we said, if I was a threat actor and I was tasked with targeting your organization, how many different ways could I come at you? What sector are you in? What sectors could I hit that aren't you that would still have an impact to you? How many of you were impacted when Colonial Pipeline got hit? You know, we had a lot of organizations, even the DOD was impacted by Colonial Pipeline. How many of you even knew Colonial Pipeline existed until they got hit? Not many people, you know. Think about all the hardware that's in your organization. How many of you have one vendor for hardware for your entire organization? Everybody uses like Dell or HP. Everything's a Dell or an HP. How many of you know the exact supply chain that comes from every piece of hardware in your organization? Every router, every switch, every hub, every computer, you know every component and where it was sourced from in every single device that you have. Anybody? No, we're talking, think about the average household has over 42 devices connected in their household, and that's a household. My household's probably triple that number. But think about that. Think about all the different ways a threat actor could get into that supply chain and add a chip in there, or add a back door, add some sort of beacon, or some way for somebody to get in. Now think about every piece of software that you have. How many of you only have one piece of software in your entire organization? Everything's just Windows, right? No, every single piece of software, once again, where did it come from? How was it sourced? Who owns it? Who has access to update it? Are automatic updates turned on? How do you validate audit? How many of you remember SolarWinds, right? How many people validated that before it just automatically installed? Some vendors these days don't even give you the option to not have that turned on. They want to be able to push things directly to your software. They want to update it automatically. You have no say in it. How much of a threat is that to your organization? How much do you trust the people that you do business with? How much OT or IoT do you have in your environment? How is that interacting with your IT systems? How is that vulnerable? How would somebody use that against you? What about cloud providers? How many of you have cloud providers, are using the cloud right now? Yeah. My thesis paper, just in case anybody was wondering, my thesis is on critical infrastructure's reliance on cloud computing and the insecurity of the cloud. How many of you trust that the cloud's secure, right? Anybody? Everybody's moving to the cloud, so it must be secure, right? That they're putting it on all their posters. The cloud is secure. The cloud is secure for themselves. They're securing their ability to do business, but they're not necessarily securing you as an individual. It's on you still to do security. Most people think when they move to the cloud that the cloud is securing for them, and that's not the truth. The truth is you're still responsible for the security in the cloud, and every cloud provider will tell you, yeah, we're not securing you, we're securing ourselves so that we're still in business, so that you always have a platform. We're here for availability. Confidentiality and integrity are still your game. That's really what it's about. But think about that. Think about, do you really know where your data is? Do you know the path that your data is taking? Think about every way a threat actor could get that data. You have no visibility into what happens on the back end of that cloud. Could somebody be using the cloud service provider as a collection point for nefarious activities? Could somebody be using the cloud itself to attack you? The cloud, that's been a big thing in the news right now, is people actually spinning up cloud instances to use them as attack machines. And how fast can the cloud vendors recognize that somebody's using the machines for nefarious activities and shut those down? But think about all the contractors you have. Do the contractors follow the same rules that you do for cybersecurity awareness, cybersecurity policies, things like that? Where are you pulling these contractors from? How are you educating your civilian workforce or your contract workforce? How many of you rely on data feeds in order for your data? How do you trust that those data feeds are correct? Are they validated? Could I poison those data feeds? What about your utilities? Could I hit you through your utilities? Could I shut your water off? Could I shut your power off? Do you build redundancy into those things? We talked about the Super Bowl, and one of the ways that we came up with when we were doing our original threat assessment for the Super Bowl was, if we attack the water company and we can shut the water off or make the water undrinkable for the stadium, guess what you're not allowed to do if you don't have drinkable water or potable water in a stadium? You can't inhabit the stadium. People would not be allowed into the stadium if there wasn't good water, if you didn't have bathroom facilities. So you could still play the game, but there would be no fans in the stands. And if you don't have fans in the stands, is it really worth playing the game? Could I shut the Super Bowl down by attacking the water company? And the answer to that is yes. Yes, I could. Think about all the different, of those 16 sectors, if we went back to them, how many of those sectors could I attack? Could I hit? And you would be impacted, whether it was deliberate, me trying to shut you down, or you're just collateral damage because somebody attacked one of these other sectors. How many of you use open source in a lot of the tools? How many of you even know if open source is being used in the software or hardware that you purchase? Is there a software build of materials or a hardware build of materials, an SBOM or an HBOM for your organization? Do you really know? So if there's a vulnerability to some open source piece of library or open source code, how long would it take you to find that in your own library? How vulnerable are you until it's fixed? Who do you depend on for emergency services? Everything from computer incident response to human incident response, active shooter. Do you really know? I go into a lot of organizations, we get called in to do incident response, and they're calling their local law enforcement. Local law enforcement is sitting there saying, hey, yeah, we are your local law enforcement, but your data is actually in your data center, which is in another county or another state. We don't have jurisdiction because it's where the data is when it's a cyber attack, not where your headquarters is as to who has jurisdiction. You actually need to call the FBI. But what if that data is in a data center that's in another country? Does that suddenly get a little more complicated? Yes, it does. These are all the things that we're looking at. Now look at all of these things and say, wow, this is a lot to take in. This is a lot. This is what you're asking your cybersecurity person to do. This is what your cybersecurity program is kind of doing. And this is even not everything. This is everything I could throw down that I said, do I have time to talk about? Now let's take a look at new and emerging technology and say, how would we account for the new emerging technology, not just against ourselves, but every single thing that now is interconnected with the way that we do things, our digital ecosystem. If I have to think about artificial intelligence, not how it impacts my organization, but how it impacts all my hardware vendors, all my software vendors, all my cloud providers, all my contractors, all my data feeds, all my services, suddenly you're talking about a massive undertaking, right? How many of you even know how much artificial intelligence you have in your organization? Yeah, there's firewall vendors that have been putting AI into their firewalls for a while. A lot of organizations didn't know that they had AI in their firewall. You know, we've actually seen instances where there's so many AIs running within an environment that the AIs start to poison each other. And what I mean by that is if one of them sees something, but the other one's pulling a data feed from that other thing and it has a false positive on it, then the other artificial intelligence and another security tool takes that data feed to be a truth, and then it starts to say, I'm going to react as if this is true, and it starts to do its thing, and then the other thing that's got a data feed from that other tool has artificial intelligence, says, oh, these other two artificial intelligence saw this thing, they both treat it as a true, so I'm going to treat it as a true. You've now just poisoned it. And we're actually seeing some threat actors looking at how can they poison artificial intelligence, what they call poisoning the well. How can we poison artificial intelligence, even on the national scale, so that everybody's information is wrong and our artificial intelligence looks better? Because theirs keeps giving the wrong information because we're feeding it bad information. How would you poison the well on AI? That's becoming a real thing. But let's look at this. How would blockchain, so we all know the value and benefits of blockchain, but how could blockchain be used against you? Have you ever thought about that? How could blockchain be used as a weapon? You know, we actually see threat actors right now using blockchain to hide their communications because they're just adding it to the block. They're adding their traffic or their communications within the blockchain. Now, it's a dual-edged sword against them because if we ever figure it out, then suddenly we have irrefutable evidence against them. But until we figure it out, it's a way for them to covertly talk to each other by just adding it, and for them to trust that the data actually came from where it came from, the non-repudiation part, because they can track the blockchain. Think about how cryptocurrency has already changed the world. You know, you have currency that can go outside the normal banking system. Could somebody, you know, we used to always say, oh, you know, one of the insider threat programs for a lot of organizations, we don't want to see how somebody's, you know, how much money that they have. Well, we're looking at traditional banking when we do that, right? What if somebody's getting rich or getting paid to be an insider threat for you in cryptocurrency? You can't track that. How would you even know that they were getting this payment? You know, you could look for other factors in there, but we focus so much on traditional financial systems, we're not looking at cryptocurrency in that particular fashion. But how about distributed manufacturing, 3D printing? I was once on a panel where somebody said that 3D printing is going to fundamentally change society. And I don't think that they're wrong. Imagine you have a technology that could replace every single over-the-road trucker that we have, because instead of having to move goods and services from one place to another, we can just send you a data file and you can print it yourself. We no longer have to have all these big supply chains of moving data or moving physical goods from location to location. We can just print what you need. But imagine somebody being able to print a gun without you having noticed that they have a gun. Imagine somebody being able to print something that can bypass your security controls from a printer that's right there on site. They don't have to sneak it through your perimeter controls, your physical security people, your bag checks and stuff like that. They can just print it once they're inside. That's the kind of thing that we're looking at. You know, how could they do these things? How many of you are ready for quantum computing? Anybody? We've got one in the back. How many of you have even looked to see if your current algorithms for encryption are quantum ready? Of course, as a DoD person. Yeah, most people out there aren't even looking at it, but you realize that a lot of threat actors, especially the nation-state threat actors, they're stealing tons and tons of encrypted data. And people are like, why are they stealing encrypted data? They can't do anything with it. Well, because the quantum race is on. They don't care that we encrypted it. They're thinking that they're going to break the quantum barrier first, and they're going to be able to unencrypt that. It might take them a couple of years, but that data is probably still valuable to them in some capacity. That's what we're looking at, is we're looking at quantum computing, both from it's going to do a lot of great things for us, but it also could be used as attackers. One of the panels I was on recently, they were talking about AI-enabled quantum, in which you could actually, I'm going to pick on a military base here. I could take a military base, I could put into a quantum-enabled AI instance, and I could say, here's the military base I want to attack. Find me the best avenue to attack this. And it can look at such a speed, at such granularity, that it can actually look at every single individual that works on that base, every single individual's job that they have on that base, what their personal life looks like, put all of that data together and say, here's exactly how you attack this base from both a cyber, physical, and here's how you can social engineer these people, and it can give you an exact attack routine. It can do all this probably within 15 to 20 minutes. Imagine having that capability where I could talk to a computer and it could build an attack routine. And I can already do something like this with just AI. Quantum would give me the ability to do it against so many data points all at once, because it could calculate that information that quickly based on all the large data sets. That's the thing, we've built all these large data sets. We live in a world of big data. Quantum computing can go through that data set so fast that it can actually figure out what people's shopping habits are, whether that makes them vulnerable for social engineering, or whether we could entice them because they keep searching for that boat online, but they never buy that boat online. So I know if I come at them with a boat, that might be the best avenue for me to get to them. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about genetic engineering, synthetic biology. Imagine these two kind of go hand in hand when we talk about it from a Homeland Security, Homeland Defense perspective. One of the things that we do is we've always bioengineered crops, right? That's a big thing. That's how we feed the world, is that we've made food better. We've made it, more sustainable for the population sizes that we have. Now imagine that a nation state could engineer, let's say, a mosquito that only eats or only attacks US biologically manufactured corn. So they could wipe out American corn crops while their corn crops are safe. Imagine they could make a mosquito that has a disease that's resident in it, but it only affects certain racial types or certain types of people. They can now look at doing things like that. That's where they're getting with some of this genetic engineering. A lot of people are like, oh, genetic engineering, we don't want them to modify humans. It's like, that's not what they're looking at these days. They're looking at how can they modify other things? How can we modify certain bugs to eat other bugs so that it protects our crops? But if you look at it from a warfare standpoint or a Homeland Security standpoint, they can go further than that. They could wipe out crops. They could make soil infertile, all from genetically engineering a certain type of bug. How are we protecting against that? How are you looking at that as a threat for your organization? And that's all coming down to like synthetic biology and genetic engineering. How far are we going to modify crops or to modify the things that we use on a day-to-day basis? And one of the last threats I'm going to talk about with these emerging threats and stuff like that, as I know I'm getting close to time, is land purchasing. Now, I know a lot of you are sitting there thinking, what does this have to do with anything? How many of you know how much land China owns in the United States? Quite a bit. See, because somewhere along the road, not just China, but a lot of people realize what's the one thing in the world that there's a finite amount of? It's land. So we purchase land. We as individuals purchase land. You might buy a couple houses, rent a couple of them out. Corporations started figuring out, hey, I can buy property, and that's why the housing market keeps rising. Corporations are buying property. Well, nation states are now using corporations to buy property. And if you start to look geographically where this property is located, especially for those, and the FDA right now, I think, has a whole division that's devoted to trying to track this, is why does China keep buying property around military bases, around water reservoirs, around communications and critical infrastructure? Why is it every place that we have critical infrastructure, suddenly China owns all the land around it? That seems a little suspicious, right? What could you do with land right next to the critical infrastructure? How do you monitor something like that? How are you prepared for that? For those of you especially who work in the DoD, have you ever looked to see who owns all the buildings or all the property around you to see, is there a threat that resides there? How could that be used against you? This is what they're looking at, is how they can do a lot of this stuff. The threat actors are actually getting very creative in how they're coming after us in the United States. They're using our own rules, our own laws against us. They're using the process to build themselves better things. So let's talk just a moment about zero trust, because that's really where a lot of this goes. And technically, CISA makes me put this in there, but I like talking about it anyway. But how many of you are familiar with zero trust and the zero trust architecture? So how many of you are baseball fans? Let me put it that way. I'm a Pittsburgh Pirates fan, so you know that I must really hate myself. So in the early days of baseball, if you bought a ticket to a baseball game, you know what that gave you the right to do? Anything you wanted. As long as the game was not yet in motion, you could run the bases. You could walk through the dugouts. You could go talk to the players. You had complete access to the entire baseball field if you bought a ticket into the baseball field. You could walk into the dugout and watch the coach give the team a rah-rah speech before they hit the field. That was your right. Then they started realizing that doesn't really work really well if we're trying to secure everything. These people started using it to figure out what the baseball strategy was going to be, more so in other sports. So they started saying we need to limit where people can go within the stadium. So when you buy a baseball ticket these days, can you just jump down onto the field whenever you want to? Can you walk into the locker rooms? Can you go up in the owner's box? Can you go in the press box? No, they limit where you can go based on your ticket. And that's really what zero trust technology is it's saying you should only be allowed to go exactly where you need to go. If your ticket says that you go to seat 3A, then you need to go to seat 3A, and that's the only place that you go. And you can also go to any concession stand. So any of the lobby areas, that's where you're allowed to go. And at its core, that's really what zero trust technology is really talking about. And that's really all I wanted to say on that today. But I think it's a fun graphic. This is one of the fun graphics they allowed me to keep in there, as I like the baseball analogy. But let's shift back to Homeland Security here. How many of you have ever been on the attacker's side of a cyber attack? How many of you have ever seen the world through their eyes? I've got a couple of hands up, and probably a couple more hands where they're like, yeah, I'm not telling you that. Yeah. So that's the one thing. I remember when I first got into this industry that my boss used to always tell me, I need you to think like a hacker. And I always thought it's really hard to think like a hacker if I've never actually done the hacking. I mean, I've watched movies and stuff. So I started working with the red teams, and then I started really getting invested, and it really changed my line of thinking. I was a better defender when I understood exactly how attackers operate. It's really hard to defend against something if you've never seen the other side of it. But for those of you who've never seen the other side of it, reconnaissance is where everything starts. And back when I was doing all of this, when I was doing pen testing and things like that, reconnaissance was something that would take me a couple of months. I would do everything from dumpster diving. I would be looking at websites. I'd be looking at resumes. So I've actually gone on job interviews for jobs I had no intention of taking just so I could find out more about the company I was about to attack. I would go and get selected for a job interview, and then I'd go in and I use the entire job interview to ask them leading questions to figure out what technology they used inside their organization, how they were using it, where they thought their limitations were, how their processes worked. And I used all that to then attack the company. I could do the same thing just looking at a job posting. Hey, you're looking for a SQL admin? I now know you use SQL. That's something I now know I need to bring my SQL kit. You show me that a lot of job postings have way too much information in them. And I can use that to attack that organization. So you do this reconnaissance. This used to take me months of a lot of legwork. With some of the tools out there now with artificial intelligence, my reconnaissance is down to about 10 minutes. I can actually have AI do almost everything for me, and I can trust 80% of what they give me and invalidate the other. That's usually what takes more time. I can actually search social media. If the social media had been around when I did all this, I'd have been a god. How many of you saw the MGM hack? How many of you know how that happened? Somebody used LinkedIn to convince the company that he actually worked for them. They created an account for him just based on the fact he had a LinkedIn profile saying he worked for them. Just because he made all the right connections. He knew the things that a lot of people are using social media to do reconnaissance for them. They get on there, they pretend to be somebody. I've had so many people come and say, that's why I don't have a social media account. I'm like, are you sure you don't have a social media account? You probably do. It's just not owned by you. Because if you don't have one and you're in a position that's somewhat public, somebody's created one for you and is impersonating you in order to get all that reconnaissance done for them. So reconnaissance happens, and then you want to get an initial compromise. Doesn't matter how the initial compromise happened. It could be an email link, it could be social engineering, whatever it's going to be, you get that initial compromise. When I used to do this, the first thing I'd want to do when I got an initial compromise is I wanted to actually cause problems on that machine. I wanted help desk to come out and look at that machine. Why? Because help desk had admin privileges, and I needed those. So I'd make sure I could get a keylogger on that thing, and then I wanted help desk to come in and log into that machine because now I had admin privileges. So I'd give them something easy to fix too, but once they logged in, that was all I cared about. I now had their credentials, and now I was a domain admin. Now I can move across the network. Now I'm laterally moving through the network until I find what it is I'm looking for. In this day and age, the last time I talked to the FBI, the average threat actor is in an environment 96 to 120 days before they detonate. What can you do in 96 days in a network? Pretty much anything you want, right? Especially if you have the right privileges. How many other accounts did you make? If you're not looking for patient 0 when you're doing incident response, you might not have found how they really gotten in there. And then you complete the mission. And once again, the mission could be everything from a confidentiality attack, an integrity attack, or an availability attack. So you have to be careful. And what is the purpose? It's easy to find the confidentiality and the availability attacks. It's not so easy to find those integrity attacks. And once again, the threat actors aren't looking to come at you directly. One of my favorite tactics was to get into a smaller company. I would look for that company's accounts receivable, accounts payable department, and I would look for any invoices that they were sending out to anybody that they were doing. Guess what I would do? I would attach my malware to those PDFs or to those invoices going out. And then I would let them email those invoices out. I didn't take over their email system. I would just attach my stuff to the invoices I knew were getting ready to go outbound. And now my malware is embedded. Do you think the other company's going to open that invoice? Yeah, it's coming from a trusted source. Now I'm in their network. And then, I would rinse and repeat. The next company I was in, I'd either do the same thing, or if I got lucky, I might be able to find that they have a dedicated link. Oh, this is the company that actually does maintenance on that particular company. They have a dedicated line. I'm just going to use the dedicated line to get into the company that I was looking for. I'm normal traffic to them. So that's what we're looking at, is there's so many different avenues. This is your ecosystem. How are you really looking at the people that you do business with? How can they impact you? I'm actually going to skip through this last thing. This is the part where I take a breath and I say, my name is Clint Walker. I'm from the federal government, and I'm here to help. Yeah, hopefully that got a little bit of a chuckle out of you, but I just wanted to quickly show up here. These are all the cybersecurity offerings. This is everything that we do at no cost to the public. These are taxpayer funded. This is everything that we can do for you and your organization. Or you can just say, hey, Clint, I want you to come in and talk to me as an advisor. No blame, I don't judge people. I just say, what are you trying to do? How can I help you accomplish it? And we have a whole team of people that are dedicated to doing that. So that's one of the big things that we do out there. So I wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions in case anybody has them, but this is my contact information if you want to get a hold of me. I'm being told that we're very soon going to drop the mail off the top of that because we are moving to a new network. But do we have any questions out there? I can definitely go back a slide. Yes, sir. I know I scratched the side. There are so many things I wanted to talk about in this. I really wish I could have deep dived into every single one of them. What you got for me?
I'll toss you another one. First, thanks for the system mission. It's absolutely vital. Thanks for your service and what you do. You described a threat. I don't know how you categorize it, but if it's a threat that's not being addressed, why are we not addressing it? Is there some pathological reason we allow ourselves to be so exposed, and how do we correct?
That is a fantastic question. I think the market drives the threats. I think from the Homeland Security perspective, and like I said, when you don't have a definition as to what something really is, everything kind of gets fit into that bucket. Cyber doesn't really have a firm definition out there either. So it's like whenever you go out there and you look at, because when I did my first paper in college, one of the things that we were looking at was, is there a cyber workforce shortage? And my initial, because I've been in cyber for so long, I was like, yeah, man, there's so many cyber positions open and there's not enough people to take those. But when I started doing the research, I started realizing, well, that's because most of these positions that are open are either new positions or they're not positions I would ever even call cyber, but they're being listed as cyber, but there's people and people aren't taking them. So there's a lot of that perception. But I think until threats actually come and start to be weaponized and start to get used, that nobody has the need to classify them. But I think that the market has to classify. That has to be the coming together. And that's why we do things like AFCEA. That's why we do things like these partnerships, is so we can start to say, what are you seeing as a threat? Should the federal government start to invest resources into combating this threat? I think from our side of the house, we probably are, and a lot of that stuff might be classified. I wish I could talk to you more about that. So there are threats that we're looking at that the public isn't looking at. And I think that that's a disconnect between the way, and I think that we really need to look at the way we classify information so that we can get the information out to people quicker. And that's what CISA's, our mission is to actually try and do that. We're trying to make things actionable. We're working very hard to declassify information so that the people are aware that there's a bigger threat out there. One of the new programs that we have going is actually called Stop Ransomware, and that's where we're actually getting information from the intelligence community, and we're actually calling up. So I actually will call people and say, hey, my name is Clint Walker, I'm from the federal government. You have a threat actor in your network right now. I need to use out-of-band communication because I'm not going to send it to your company email, but I can get you this information to show you exactly how to kick these people out before they detonate. Are you interested in this information? 9 times out of 10, people hang up the phone on me. Even so, in the beginning, when we first started the program 2 years ago, I got hung up on a lot. I've actually had 2 of my guys arrested because we actually tried to go on site and give them the information in person, and they arrested us for trying to social engineer or impersonate. And even though we have credentials just like the FBI does, I can flash my credentials. I've even had the FBI standing right there with me, and they still wouldn't believe I work for the federal government. Now we have a number that you can call. You can call CISA Central, and you can say, is Clint Walker really trying to contact you? And they'll say, here's the ticket number that we have, and Clint Walker is a real employee. So we have ways to validate now. But this year alone, just in Region 4, so in the 8 states I cover, we have stopped over $792 million worth of ransomware because of the notifications that we've made. So hopefully that answered your question a little bit, but what else do we have out there?
Thank you. Good morning. Which industry would you say would be the most vulnerable today, and why?
Oh, they're all vulnerable, but there are some industries. So you have to look at it from the industry's perspective. When I first started doing this as a cybersecurity advisor working for DHS, the energy sector had never been a target. Once again, everything they used was OT systems. They were all segmented. They were not connected to the internet. There was nothing to attack. You had to physically go to an energy company if you wanted to do something. Once they started putting those things online, that's when the threat actors realized we can really hit them in their energy sector. I think, what happened in the Ukraine back, 10 or 15 years ago really started highlighting that. And the energy sector didn't realize, because they'd always been running on very small margins to begin with. They were making profit, but not the profits that everybody thought that they were making. And so they didn't have the money to invest in cybersecurity. They wanted to innovate. They wanted to make a world of convenience, but they didn't understand how security fit into that. So they've been coming along quicker. But then you start to look at the water sector. Nobody's ever gone after the water sector before. So why would they invest a lot of money in cybersecurity when they were never a target? Well, now they're a target. And that's what you have is you have a lot of these small, medium-sized businesses that were like, why would I be a target? I don't have the money to invest. I'm a startup. I'm trying to do things. So every single sector has the vulnerable entity. That's why I said I always found the smallest widget provider, because they couldn't do cybersecurity. And then we all have this inherent trust to trust everybody that we do business with. And unless you got a full zero trust architecture going on, you shouldn't trust anybody you do business with. You shouldn't trust that their data, you shouldn't allow them connection. The number of companies I go into where they just allow their, vendors and suppliers to log into their systems using a group account with no visibility as to what they're doing once they get into the network. As long as they say that they were patching that one thing that they were supposed to patch, they don't really care, because they trust them. Hey, I'm paying them money. If they ever did something, I would just fire them. I was like, yeah, but the damage has already been done. And if the damage is an integrity attack, if they're just looking to, or a confidentiality attack where they're just looking to steal information or slowly degrade your system, I was like, then you might not ever know that they're the cause of your problem. So every sector, but I would say that right now the water sector is kind of lagging behind, but they're picking up pace. But that's why we as CISA exist, is to try and go out there and work with all 16 sectors to say, where do you think you're vulnerable? Because a threat actor, the threat to a nuclear power plant is different than the threat to a water company, is different to the threat to a financial services, sector. Every sector has their own little uniqueness about them and a different way a threat actor would come after them. So, and that's the part of the problem, is we don't really have enough cybersecurity specialists out there that understand the 16 sectors, the ecosystems that surround them. So you have these generalists trying to tell people in the energy sector, this is how you should be protecting yourself, or you should be using best practices. Well, best practices are just kind of a generalist thing. You need specific. It'd be like trying to buy something out of the box, plug it into your environment, saying, well, we bought it out of the box, it's good to go. We don't need to tailor it to our environment. Let's just let it run naturally. It doesn't really do you a whole lot of good unless you tailor it to your environment. Every security needs tailored to that exact environment. And in some of these industries, you look at the transportation industry, the aviation industry is completely different from the over-the-road trucking, which is completely different than port security. So even having specialization within some of these sectors is completely different. And even aviation, the ground control aviation systems are different than the air aviation systems, completely different types of security that you're looking for there. And then the more convenience, every time a new technology gets added into that mix, you have to relook at everything that you're doing to secure. You have to go back through and say, will this cause a problem for this current security control? I know everybody here is familiar with certification and accreditation, right? Yeah. If you're only getting recertified every 5 years, every 3 years, technology is moving too fast for every 3-year recertification. Every single security control needs to be checked we're looking at a point where only artificial intelligence is going to be able to keep up with the amount of change happening in an environment to how it impacts every single security control that change might impact. So that's really where we're at. And the other side of that coin is if artificial intelligence is attacking us, only artificial intelligence can defend us because we can't move at machine speed, but machine speed can move at machine speed. So that's a whole different conversation. We could spend hours just on that one. What else we got?
Anna, thank you very much. And I just want to give I'm retired Army, but I want to give a personal experience. We've talked about the organizational aspects of cybersecurity. I have a cousin that I'm sort of responsible and help managing, has lost over $1 million that we know went to a terrorist organization in Syria. It was a complex scheme. It started with stolen ID of an active duty Air Force NCO in Texas. And I won't go into the details of the scheme, but it was a successful scheme. The FBI has been involved. I've talked with the FBI and local police to try to resolve this. So we're at an individual level. We have to have our own level of security as well, particularly those active duty. And I have personal experiences go beyond that. I subscribe to 2 services to watch everything about me because I know there's a felon in California that's using my personal identification information for nefarious means. I have no idea why. I stopped someone tried to use my personal information to open a bank account in a rural small bank in Kansas. Who knows why? Don't know. So it goes beyond the level that you're describing for us, which is just great. But because I think we're all vulnerable, those of us that are active duty or retired, we're all vulnerable because of our trust and integrity and things that we've done in our lives. And I give that personal warning. I have a new threat that's popped up on me personally here in the last couple of weeks. Jason from Asheville, North Carolina. And I'm still in the middle of running him down. I don't know if it's a him or a her or an organization, but keeps trying to contact me. I can't stop it. I'm not going to answer. Never leaves a message. Never gives me a message. I know that it's not Asheville. I know he lives someplace in Florida or organization. But I stay on top of it to block it. I don't know why I've become vulnerable. I have no idea. I suspect it's my background from military and work that I've done post-retirement. So just a special warning to all those young soldiers here. pay attention. Truly pay attention. You may not even know that your information is being used in some other schema, which is kind of what happened to my family member. The NCO had no idea that his information was being used. It's out there. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yeah, one of the other things, just quickly, one of the other scams that we saw out there is, we talk about integrity attacks. There was a threat actor group that was trying to get into county records, and they were changing the ownership. How many of you know that e-signature is now used on a lot of purchasing on things? So they would get in and change ownership of property long enough to sell the property, and then they would convert it back to the original owner. So they could sell a piece of property, it would go through the whole e-signature or the whole validation as to whether this person actually owned the property, stuff like that, and much for them sell it. But now that property had two owners, the people who really owned it and the people who just bought it thinking that they were now the new owners. And man, it's been a real nightmare for some courts out there to try and figure out, well, how do we say who the real owner is? How do we prove that these people actually owned it? Or how did it get sold in the first place? Especially when the threat actors are able to get in, manipulate the data for long enough to do a digital transaction and then convert it back to what its original looked like. So all kinds of fun stuff out there. All right, thank you, everybody. Always my